You do look terribly glum. Well, I'm Mary Poppins, of course. I have just the thing to cheer you up. Would you like me to read you a story? I have my absolute favorite book right here. It's all about me, you know. All right. Now, I best start with chapter 1, just to get you all caught up. Chapter 1 is called The East Wind. If you want to find Cherry Tree Lane, all you have to do is ask the policeman at the crossroads. He will push his helmet slightly to one side, scratch his head thoughtfully, and then he will point his huge white-gloved finger and say, "First to your right, second to your left, sharp right again, and you're there. Good morning." And sure enough, if you follow his directions exactly, you will be there, right in the middle of Cherry Tree Lane, where the houses run down one side and the park runs down the other, and the cherry trees go dancing right down the middle. And if you are looking for number 17, and it is more than likely that you will be, for this book is all about that particular house, you will soon find it. To begin with, it is the smallest house in the lane, and besides that, it is the only one that is rather dilapidated and needs a coat of paint. But Mr. Banks, who owns it, said to Mrs. Banks that she could either have a nice, clean, comfortable house, or 4 children, but not both, for he couldn't afford it. And after Mrs. Banks had given the matter some consideration, she came to the conclusion that she would rather have Jane, who was the eldest, and Michael, who came next. And so it was settled, and that was how the Banks family came to live at number 17, with Mrs. Brill to cook for them, and Ellen to lay the tables, and Roberts and I to cut the lawn and clean the knives, and polish the shoes, and, as Mr. Banks always said, to waste his time and my money. And of course, there was Katie Nana, who really doesn't deserve to come into the book at all, because at the time I am speaking of, she had just left number 17. "Without by your leave or a word of warning? Oh, and what am I to do?" said Mrs. Banks. "Advertise, my dear," said Mr. Banks, putting on his shoes. "But if it were me, I should get somebody to put in the morning paper the news that Jane and Michael Banks require the best possible nanny at the lowest possible wage, and at once. And then I should wait and watch for the nannies to queue up outside the front gate." "There she is," said Michael, pointing suddenly to a shape that banged heavily against the gate. Jane peered through the gathering darkness. "Let's go and see who it is," said Jane, taking Michael's arm. Presently, they saw their mother coming into the house with a visitor following her. The newcomer had shiny black hair and small, rather peering blue eyes. "You'll find that they are very nice children," said Mrs. Banks. "Now, about references," she went on. "Oh, I make it a rule never to give references," the other said firmly. Mrs. Banks stared. "But I thought it was usual," she said. I understood people always did. A very old-fashioned idea to my mind." Jane and Michael heard the stern voice say, "Very old-fashioned. Quite out of date, as you might say." "Very well, then. Well, we won't bother about them. I only asked in case, you required it. The nursery is upstairs." And she led the way toward the staircase, taking all the time, not stopping once. And because she was doing that, Mrs. Banks did not notice what was happening behind her. Jane and Michael, watching from the top landing, had an excellent view of the extraordinary thing the visitor did. Certainly she followed Mrs. Banks upstairs, but not in the usual way. With her large bag in her hands, she slid gracefully up the banisters, and arrived at the landing at the same time as Mrs. Banks. Such a thing, Jane and Michael knew, had never been done before. Down, of course, for they had often done it themselves, but up, never. They gazed curiously at the new visitor. "How did you come?" asked Jane. "It looks as if the wind just blew you here." "It did," said Mary Poppins. "Well, I hope you enjoyed that little story. Perhaps next time I read, I'll have someone else help me. I wonder who you'll see next. Have an absolutely supercalifragilisticexpialidocious day, dears."